Thank you, Chancellor Diermeyer, for that kind introduction. Members of the faculty, distinguished guests, family members, and friends of the graduates, and you, the 2021 graduating class of Vanderbilt University. It is a personal pleasure and a true honor to be your commencement speaker. I've had the privilege of delivering several commencement addresses over the years. I invariably have included in these addresses, in some manner or form, a reference to the fact that I was in your situation many years ago when I graduated from college and then from medical school. And so I felt that I could directly relate to what you have just experienced as a student. I might then go on to draw analogies from my past to your present. Well, that just does not pass muster this year. For what you have experienced as a result of the profound upending of your lives by COVID-19 is truly unprecedented. No students dating back over 100 years since the historic influenza pandemic of 1918 have had this level of disruption to their lives during their student years. Furthermore, the world into which you will enter as you leave the confines of this beautiful campus has changed dramatically. The adjustments that you will have to make in order to function in the world that awaits you are substantial. However, what I have seen of how you have responded to this pandemic thus far gives me confidence that you will adjust and thrive. I have seen from a distance how you have cooperated with your faculty in a program to keep your campus safe and to the degree possible free of COVID-19, and how you've managed to participate in keeping the university open and functioning while achieving a much lower than expected infection rate. This outcome could only have been accomplished by discipline, teamwork, and respect for your fellow students. In addition, several of your Vanderbilt scientists, whom I know quite well, are playing major roles in the development of a substantial public health response to this pandemic through the implementation of high-impact biomedical research. Of this, you should feel justly proud. However, as you enter a hurting world that is trying desperately to recover from this historic pandemic that is still raging and whose future course is still uncertain, whether you fully realize it or not, you can play an important role in ending the pandemic and in our recovery from it. What do I mean by this? Leadership. I refer here to your potential for leadership. You are graduating from an extraordinary institution. The young men and women of Vanderbilt University are the future leaders of our society, a society that has suffered greatly from a public health standpoint, with close to 600,000 deaths in the United States alone, and unimaginable physical and mental suffering for millions of others. And from an economic standpoint, with millions of jobs lost and businesses destroyed, perhaps irreparably. It is a hurting and changed world, and the new normal to which we will return may not be entirely the same as the normal from which we departed in January 2020. You are going to play an important role in shaping this new normal. Perhaps it can even be a better normal, but more on that in a moment. For certain, you cannot do it alone, but it cannot be done without you and your leadership. In this regard, leadership is a gradual process that you have already begun when you enrolled here at Vanderbilt. I speak not necessarily of officially designated leadership, which some of you may assume in your careers. I speak of the leadership that can take many forms, including the quiet and subtle leadership of example. Do not believe for a moment that you are too young to begin to assume leadership roles. There is a quote that is attributed to the famous Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw, whose career spanned the late 19th and early 20th centuries. I never liked the quote as a young man myself, and I like it even less now that I am far from being a young man. The quote is, the pity that youth is wasted on the young, implying that young people have boundless energy, great vigor, and a bright future. But because they are so young, they do not appreciate what this means, nor do they take proper advantage of it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, prove Mr. Shaw wrong. Take advantage of that youth and start doing your thing right now for yourselves and for society. You do not need to wait. At this critical time in our history, our country and the world need your leadership. Which brings me to my next point of discussion. COVID-19 and the bright light shone on society's failings. Our country's experience with COVID-19 has shed a bright light on one of the great failings in our society, and that is the extraordinary health disparities among minority groups, especially African Americans, Hispanics, and Native Americans. These minority groups have a much greater likelihood of getting infected with SARS-CoV-2 and developing the disease COVID-19 because of the nature of the jobs that many of them have as essential workers in society. More importantly, when they get infected with the coronavirus, they have a much greater likelihood of developing a severe consequence of infection due to the greater incidence and prevalence among them of underlying comorbid medical conditions, such as hypertension, chronic lung disease, diabetes, obesity, among others, that lead to a multifold increase in hospitalizations and death compared to the general population. Very few of these diseases are racially determined, and almost all relate to the social determinants of health, dating back to conditions that many minorities find themselves in from birth, regarding availability of adequate diet, lack of access to health care, and the restriction put upon them by the undeniable racism that exists in our society. And so let us promise ourselves that our memory of this tragic reality, that an infectious disease disparately hospitalizes and kills people because of the color of their skin, does not fade after we return to our new normal. It will take a decades-long commitment for society to reverse this trend. I strongly urge you to be part of that commitment, which brings me to my next point of discussion: public service and responsibility. I sincerely believe that regardless of our career paths, we cannot look the other way from pressing societal issues. There are still pockets of society here in our own country that are steeped in poverty, drug abuse, violence, health disparities, inadequate education, racism, discrimination, and despair. Some of you may devote your future careers and lives to directly addressing these societal issues. Most of you, understandably, will not. In this regard, public service does not necessarily mean a profession or an avocation devoted entirely to public service. One can incorporate public service into your lives regardless of your career choice. Please take this into serious consideration and make it part of your lives. This might hopefully help counter another sad truth prevalent in our society: unprecedented divisiveness. My next point of discussion: COVID-19 and the divided nation. Throughout most of the year 2020, I was a member of the White House Coronavirus Task Force under President Donald Trump. In that capacity, I, together with my colleagues on the task force, tried to persuade the country to follow certain public health guidelines that could dampen the outbreak that was evolving and continues to evolve into the most devastating pandemic of a respiratory disease in over 100 years. Clearly, we have a common enemy, the SARS coronavirus, and a common enemy requires an unified and a consistent response. The guidelines that we developed required restrictions on society that clearly were painful and had enormous economic and individual personal consequences. However, these restrictions were necessary and ultimately saved lives. I would have thought that as a nation, we would all pull together, similar to what we had done following the terrorist attacks of 9/11, or even during World War II. However, sadly, that has not happened. Tragically, the pandemic brought to the surface the intense and glaring divisiveness in our society that led to the practice of proven public health countermeasures, such as wearing a mask or avoiding congregate settings, taking on a strong political connotation. What surprised me, and frankly continues to frighten me, is the willingness of so many people to believe in alternative facts and deny reality that is staring them right in the face, such as believing or pretending to believe that the almost 600,000 deaths from COVID-19 is fake news or a hoax. It took an historic pandemic, which I, as a scientist, a physician, and a public health official, was deeply involved in, and which forced me at times to come into conflict with the President of the United States to impress upon me how destructive to our nation is the current palpable divisiveness among us. And so, as you leave this extraordinary institution, whether you are a Democrat, a Republican, or independent, please do not allow differences of opinion that you might have lead to outright hostility. We will not fare well as a nation through the current challenge of a pandemic and the inevitable future challenges that our country will face if we do not pull together with a singular purpose of the common good. Having said all of this, I want to comment briefly on the concept of graduation and your status as a student. I call it the paradox of graduation and the concept of the perpetual student. Since this is your graduation, it is natural for you to feel from this day forward, unless you're going to graduate school, that you are no longer really a student. Let me tell you that this is just an illusion. In my own case, almost immediately upon graduation from college, and certainly upon graduation from medical school, I learned that my student days had actually just begun. The scope of what you have learned here at Vanderbilt, and importantly, what you will need to learn after you leave here, is like a giant mosaic, and this mosaic of your knowledge and experience is eternally unfinished, as it should be. What you're experiencing now and have learned as you live through the COVID-19 pandemic is part of that mosaic, a mosaic that will perpetually expand. Now, there are two sides to this concept of a perpetual student who is continually learning. The good news is that it's going to be very difficult to get bored, and the level of self-fulfillment is going to be very high. The sobering news is that you will likely develop a sense of low-grade uneasiness and a subliminal feeling of unfinished business, as if we all do not have enough of that anyway, as we prepare to enter a new and exciting phase in our lives. This feeling, however, is not necessarily a negative, since it can be transformed into something productive and positive. You will realize that you will never know as much as you want to or need to know. And you will find that you are participating in a dynamic process with a steep learning curve. This was particularly true for me as a young physician and a scientist, since the consequences of getting something wrong and not being aware of something that you should have known can be serious. However, this is true to a greater or lesser degree in any career path that you're going to choose. It is this feeling that can serve as the catalyst to constantly improve yourself, and this will be counterbalanced by a palpable excitement of continual learning. After all these years, I still derive energy and motivation from that very subtle tension. And I still marvel at how much fun the learning process is. Speaking of fun, let us end on a note of joy. I have been speaking to you over the past several minutes over the serious issues that we're facing in the context of the historic pandemic of COVID-19. Let me assure you, as a public health person who's devoting every waking hour and even some of my dreams to ending this pandemic, that it will end, and we will come out of this stronger than we were before this challenge. I promise you that. And so, putting this serious business aside for a moment, I want to close with a reminder about the joyousness of life. Allow yourselves to cultivate this joy as much as you do your professional accomplishments. As you might expect, different pursuits and activities provide joy in different ways to different people. Find your source of joy and happiness and embrace it. And let the sound of your laughter be heard. Congratulations to you, to your families, and to your loved ones. Good luck, and God bless you.